Yeah. So I'll be applying into psychiatry this year. For me, right, and psychiatry, my PhD, just a very quick 1 or 2 sentences of my PhD, it was really trying to understand the kind of the neural circuits and the neural representations, kind of short-term memories needed to help guide our second-by-second decision making. And one of the things that I realized was there's kind of peripherally related to my work are the folks that largely work on humans in the field of cognitive science. Mm-hmm. They typically, I would say cognitive science to me is essentially where mathematics and psychology overlap.
Yes.
Yeah. And what's really beautiful about it, there are people in the field that really take very principled, normative or semi-normative approaches to understanding, various cognitive constructs, why we behave the way we do, how disease arises, things like that. And so what's happened in the last 10 years is essentially a new field has emerged called computational psychiatry. And it means different things to different people. But I think the biggest division in computational psychiatry is you have people on one end of it who care about predictive models. Yeah. Right. This is like primarily what most folks in machine learning kind of work on. And then there are folks that care about generative models, which say, okay, well, what are the underlying principles that allow this system, in this case, the system is the human, to give me the particular set of outputs. And I live more on the generative side, because I think it's the domain where we have the ability to get these kind of deep underlying principles, like the kinds I was talking about earlier in information theory and physics. And I'll just give as an example, an area where I think we're still coming to terms with what these advances are, but one of the nice, deeper understandings that I've gotten from this field that I have not gotten from medicine, actually, has been in the study of anxiety.
Yeah.
And so, anxiety, I think we all know what it feels like. We've had moments when we've been anxious. Potentially, these moments have lasted longer than we would have liked. But yet, despite that, I felt in medicine, the kind of definition I was getting was more of an intuitive definition. It's like, anxiety, it's that thing, what it feels like, it's that. Yeah. Whereas what computational psychiatry offered is it said, okay, well, let's just think about the kinds of decisions that people make. As an example, let's just do it through some sort of ideal Bayesian inference agent, just going about the world, gathering data, updating updating its new priors about the world, and essentially making decisions that way. And using that as a framework, we've slowly realized that one way to think about anxiety is an aberration in uncertainty processing. And in a way, and the data still are a bit messy, but one of my interpretations as a way to think about anxiety is this is essentially a disease where uncertainty is just constantly set at a high level, right? And then in that way, if that ends up being a useful way to think about anxiety, it says that feeling of anxiety, that feeling potentially is the normal feeling of uncertainty. Yeah. Right? It's just naturally what you feel. If your brain is saying the world is always uncertain, of course you're always going to feel that.
Yes.
And then once I realized that, an example came to mind, which I said, it makes so much sense for me. When I feel anxiety all of a sudden when I'm driving behind somebody in residential neighborhoods, and I can feel that they're looking for parking. And what that means is that this car is going to all of a sudden hit its brakes. It's going to all of a sudden change lanes. It's going to all of a sudden, switch and turn without signaling, right? And that uncertainty, that lives within me. And I say, oh my God, I'm going to have to be careful because I could get in an accident if I'm not paying attention because of this. And so, that's just one example, but it's one where this kind of top-down approach, this way of saying, okay, what problem is being solved? Yeah. How can it be solved in principle? And what aberrations can arise from this generative process? Yeah. Which allows me to understand. It actually ties in really nicely with what you're describing, because what you're describing is going a level deeper. right? It's saying, I can say, okay, well, the computation we're trying to solve is right, minimize uncertainty. You're describing kind of the neural network instantiation of whatever that process might be. How do I get somebody from an anxious state to a non-anxious state?
Yeah.
And so what I would like to do kind of long-term moving forward is to essentially take these kinds of approaches and apply them to psychiatric diseases generally. And be able to use that for a few things. So the anxiety example I gave, right, one of the things that helps is just understanding. Right, understanding is one of the most powerful things you can have. If you can explain to yourself what a disease is, if you can explain to a patient what they have, it really is a powerful tool. And then all of the other things that can come with that, which is, right, can I diagnose better? Can I prognosticate? Can I tell you something about the trajectory of your disease? Can I tell you how you're going to respond to a particular therapy? So on, so on. Can I come up with new therapies, right? If I understand this black box a bit better, I might be able to think of new inputs that can essentially change the latent variables and push it in a way where, right, you get better trajectories, as it were, kind of healthier trajectories. So, that maybe it's a bit long-winded as well.
No, that made sense. I think the clarity of each piece and how it kind of builds together, I think, is the beautiful part of it. And it's hard to then not see everything in that perspective and want to talk about everything in that perspective.
Yeah.
This is probably better for a different day and a different conversation, but I do like that model that you kind of high level went over with respect to anxiety as a signal that is typically modulated, and the output then goes to premotor cortex, goes and modulates frontal, I believe. It feeds back into frontal executive function. For a long time, I tried to see what we were doing with depression as a transistor, where you're just broken and the signal that's coming in to modulate your current is just not modulating the current. Your inputs and your outputs are decoupled. And there's this good signal that, and forgive my simple-mindedness, that your amygdala is kind of sending all the time, which is, hey, I be a little bit anxious, be a little bit fearful, be on edge. That typically gets pressed down a little bit through internal circuitry. Hypothesis, and this is a hypothesis. I feel necessary to make this distinction. There's a difference between collecting good, rich data and deriving a model from it that puts so much emphasis on the experiment being very well controlled, very well measured, and everything, to derive an understanding from data. My PhD was not like that. My PhD was more like, what are leading thoughts of how this circuit works, project how that should look, what's an alternative approach, what's an alternative model, how would that look, what's an alternative model, how would that look, collect a data set that you can collect, and then do a maximum likelihood estimation, essentially, or most likely, which hypothesis is most likely to have explained the data hypothesis. So I'll say that, and I'll leave it at that. That's a discussion point for hopefully a later day when we talk about inference and controls. But when we do DBS of the SCC white matter, we're hitting uncinate fasciculus, which connects your amygdala to your frontal, right? So it kind of goes backwards through the temporal, goes through the SCC, and goes to your frontal, just distributed to your frontal. And we specifically try to hit that, amongst other things. We also try to hit cingulum bundle. We also hit forceps minor, so there's some hemispheric communication. But the one thing that I consistently saw in our small data set, but rich data set, we had 256 EEG channels in our patients, and when we stimulated the SCC white matter, we saw alpha changes in the temporal channels, the channels right over temporal cortex. I don't know if it's temporal cortex necessarily driving those changes, but I will assume they are for this discussion. And frontal.
Yeah, the assumption coming back.
Huh?
I said the assumption coming back.
Yeah, right? So there you go. You can attack everything. So frontal and temporal, and they did the opposite things. I need to piece together exactly what they did, but one of them was like an alpha, one of them was an alpha decrease, one of them was an alpha increase. And alpha oscillations in the brain are typically associated with synaptic inputs into a region. So increases in alpha are seen in your occipital lobe when you close your eyes. The reasoning, at least the old school reasoning, I'm not up to speed, is with reduced visual input, your occipital lobe is just neutral. It's just kind of an idling car. And when you shift into gear, your engine sounds different. It sounds low initially, could be theta, and then it sounds high. It could be beta, right? So there's an engagement, but your neutral is alpha. What we saw was constantly on the right side. Everything seemed to be on the right side. This right-sided temporal, this right-sided frontal. And the working hypothesis that I came out of that with was very much DBS is such a mindless waveform. It's a 130 hertz square-ish wave that charge balances, and it's just done 130 times. This one waveform, when done in the STN, alleviates Parkinson's. When done in depression, alleviates depression. It can't be the stimulation itself that's introducing information into the network to move its state. It kind of has to be a reduction of a pathological signal. That's the only model that makes sense. That also makes sense in that DBS hasn't worked with Alzheimer's, to my knowledge, and it hasn't worked with some of these more complicated, potentially lack of positive signals diseases. So what you were saying about anxiety kind of just being this on switch and just staying on really jives with at least some preliminary hypotheses of what we saw in our patients in terms of their depression-related anxiety. And also, just to round out the picture, has a very clear dynamical systems language associated with it. There's a critical stable point that patients get into that they're just unable to get out of with standard typical inputs, with comfort, with cakes, with birthday parties. Those inputs come into your nervous system and they don't move you out of that stable point. You're just stuck at that stable point, and that stable point happens to be reflected in your clinical state as sadness, as suicidality, as anhedonia. But it's the key part of it is not so much where that point is, but the fact that that point is stable. And what DBS maybe does is it reduces the depth of that stable point, or it makes that stable point into a limit cycle. It like breaks that single critical point into a orbit that becomes stable. And that's where we all live. We all have cycles in our moods. And when we have an input, we move off that cycle, but we kind of come back to that cycle. That's called a hop bifurcation. I spent a year trying to study hop bifurcations in the math portion, the pure math portion of it, and in the control portion of it, in my Europe postdoc, which we can talk about later, obviously. But I just wanted to say that because I think it jives. It jives with this. You tell me. Does that jive? Does that mix? Does that have some resonance with maybe the work that you've seen and done?
Yeah. So, right. So this is where it helps to have formalisms of your problem at kind of different scales. And so ways that people have sort of formalized aspects of depression, right? And one thing, just to be clear, I'm gleaning over many subtypes that certainly exist, right?
Sure.
But a way to potentially think about depression is you might think that part of what your brain does is akin to a reinforcement learning algorithm, where I have a variable called value, right? I have the things in the world have values of assigned to them. However I've learned them, that's the subject of reinforcement learning. One of the simplest algorithms you can use is when I come in contact with something that I've valued, I'm expecting a certain amount of reward. That's literally what value means. Value is the expected reward, expectation of whatever the distribution.
Yep.
And what happens is I then perceive the amount of reward I actually got from that thing, right? And so if the reward is more than I expected, now I have a positive prediction error, and then I learn from that. What that means is that my value will increase. It'll move up in that direction a little bit, or it could be a negative reward prediction error, it goes down. Yeah. And ways to think about depression within this reinforcement learning framework, and this in particular I'm describing the simplest model-free reinforcement learning.
I like it, yeah.
Is maybe the learning rate is artificially low, right? And the learning rate, what it controls is how much should I learn from this error. Yeah. Maybe the learning rate's fine, and your ability to calculate that error is what's disrupted.
Yes.
Right, and there's papers that argue, for or against, a number of these models. Yeah. But the net effect of that, right? If I have a system some neural circuit, and its job is to maintain a representation of value.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm unable to move my value representation around, either because my learning rate is low, either because I can't form reward prediction errors, what that's going to come across is as a fixed point, right? Something that should be moving cannot be perturbed.
Yeah.
Right. And the question is now, how do I make it move in a healthy way? And right, you're describing DBS as, yeah.
But in many
and so I would say it totally jives.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In many respects also, then it critically makes it important to have talk therapy, to have cognitive behavioral therapy. All these things come in and they couple into your dynamics in very different ways. Some of them leverage the structure that's already set up. The structure that's already set up experience the same socioeconomic stressors. They experience the same lifetime developmental stressors. So there's a very valuable, I like it because it's not, DBS is just incidental. It's just a unique opportunity to do targeted control and targeted control in the not mind control sense, but control in the influence sense, control in the medication sense, but then also measurement. But yeah, I think I like I really like that you said that because I have not delved into the reinforcement learning style models for depression, but I'm really glad that that's evolved. And I believe last I looked into it was I believe there was a paper about computational psychiatry in 2016 by Virginia Tech professor.
That is probably.
I'm trying to remember. I forgot. He came and visited. He was a nice guy. Anyways, I like that I forgot about it and that I can now revisit it. And I'm so excited to see what reinforcement learning models have emerged for depression because I'm a hammer. And there's a great paper from someone up at Berkeley who beautifully reframes reinforcement learning as just modern optimal control theory. Literally the same thing. It's what are your intrinsic dynamics? How do actions change those dynamics? How do those dynamics map to value? Controls is more about continuous spaces, and reinforcement learning for the most part is about discrete spaces, but people are trying to move towards continuous space reinforcement learning. I forget his name, but anyways.
There's a couple people at Virginia Tech. Is Reed Montague is probably the most famous?
Yes, Reed Montague. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so he does a lot of like social decision making.
Yes. But he had a 2016 paper about computational psych, and it probably was not the first, but it was the first one that made a splash with my clinical circles, with the neurologists, the psychiatrists. That was the moment we stopped having conversations where I was being told math can't explain depression. Yeah. That's about when those conversations started tapering off, and I felt happy.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, it's I think it's a fascinating field. Time-wise, where are we at?
What am I going to guess? Probably an hour 10 or so.
Yeah. No, this is fantastic. Hopefully, we'll get another chance to do this soon. I would imagine.
Hey man, I'm quarantined for another 2 months almost. So.
Me too. I'm quarantined until I take step 2 end of July.
Okay. CK, CS.
CK. CS is a whole thing right now, right?
Oh yeah. See, it'll be online.
You
virtual.
saw that? It'll be 1,300 online. Some Emory folks are really. Some Emory med students are very annoyed.
I mean, the test doesn't need to exist, period.
No.
All right. If everybody passed your test or whatever, okay, let's stick on positive topics. Let's stick on positive topics.
let's stick on positive topics like depression and
hey, understanding. Okay, understanding. That's the thing.
There's so much more we can discuss. I am very eager to get your thoughts about third year, how engineering helped third year, and really talk about. I'd love to have a full discussion about the nature of inference, the nature of influence of management, of therapeutic management, because at least in my experience, and I think your experience, we've talked about this before, is there really is a very clean role for the engineering problem-solving approach of balancing understanding with action and iteratively going between those two, and the iteration gives a natural benefit in dynamic systems that change over time, where things that might not make sense in a, if you just assume the study from 10 years ago still holds. There was an RCT done 10 years ago, but the US's lead level acceptance tolerance changed, then they probably changed the results. You need to be able to adaptively improve on that. I'd be curious to get your take on that. So we'll probably save that for a different discussion.
I think, I actually think that discussion will be really nice because years 3 and 4, I think, really tie into that. Because a lot of, I think what an undercurrent of that discussion is going to be the culture of medicine.
Yes.
Right. And years 3 and 4 are that's your first exposure to the culture of medicine. And I think understanding where some of the optimalities and some of the suboptimalities in medical decision making come from. Yeah. I think that will be like a really nice intersection.
That'll be absolutely. I think that'll be very exciting. I think it also speaks to a lot of contemporary. Let's be honest. COVID is a very uncertain environment, and being able to be adaptive is crucial. And I think people are having some really good discussions, deep discussions about what constitutes responsible therapy and responsible research. And I imagine our perspectives are at the least different. Maybe not right, but at least different. But yeah, cool, awesome, man. This was a blast.
I agree, man. This was
let's make this. Let's set aside. Maybe let's try this 2 more times, and we'll see if people really resonate with it, like it.
I'm down. Hey, man, I'm down. Package it in my residency application.
Exactly, right?
I'm a heretic. It's heretical.
SciComm, baby, SciComm. I'm
Two views, you and me. Maybe 3, my mom. All right, I'll add my mom.
I am going to try to get some other folks in on this. Of
course.
Friends of mine, and any friends of yours that you think would really like these types of discussions. One of the beautiful things about, I think, the engineering background is there is such a diversity of engineering backgrounds. Chemical engineers don't talk like electrical engineers, don't talk like biomedical engineers. So how each one comes in, but at the same time, we have math as that unifying language, is a very powerful model for medicine, where CT surgeons need to talk with cardiologists, need to talk with pulmonologists, need to talk with renal folks, but everyone has their own language, everyone has their own lexicon. I think this was actually what I wanted to mention way back at the top of today's session. Language, right? Like, it's important to outline your assumptions, but then we need to be careful about, each of us has a dictionary set. To bring a little bit of signal processing, everyone has a dictionary set. And when we hear words, we project them into our dictionary set, assuming that our dictionary sets match. That when I say I'm efficient when I do this, you and I have the same definition of efficiency, which we probably don't. But we assume we do, and the rest of our conversation moves forward with that assumption. Same kind of thing, like, how do we get a unified language amongst medical professions, specialties, especially us in a unique situation where we got to see all of them over the course of a year. I'd be eager to sort of talk about that. It's a little bit of a teaser if anyone is actually watching this. Cool. But yeah, anything else?
I think that's it.
Good stuff,
this has been a rejuvenating post-run conversation.
For me, it's pre-run, but it's good too.
yeah, of course.
Be good things to chew on while I'm running.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Bilal.
Peace, my friend. Right. It's good. Not a doctor until you're a doctor.
That's true.
All right.
I'll catch you later.
All right. Take care.
See ya. Thanks for joining, everybody. So we'll try to do this more often if people are interested, but honestly, it's a lot of fun to talk about these things, to kind of work through a lot of these experiences that we've had in the long MD PhD path. Maybe we'll get some more professional stuff set up, maybe not. We'll have fun with it. Hope all of y'all are staying safe and, keep at it.